Yo, Pro Wrestling Podcast listeners, help us out and click subscribe to show your support. And while you're at it, shoot on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/Pro Wrestling Podcast to become a Patreon of the Pro Wrestling Podcast. Be a contributor, get your name into the highlight comments, get an opportunity to potentially host a live episode with me on one of our Saturday Night Live broadcasts. And speaking of those, this Saturday night, just like every Saturday night, we will be having a live broadcast at 9 p.m. Make sure you call in to our sound off line at 267-642-1160 anytime between now and during the live show to give us your questions and comments you want us to address during the episode. In addition, on those live episodes, we go into whatever the results and new matches are in our different tournaments. Currently, we are going to be looking this week at round 4 of the tag team tournament with 256 of the greatest tag teams in the history of wrestling. And when we go into all that, we also like to cover all the news and rumors as we do in these podcast episodes. So get into that if you can. And if you really want to get into the Fro Wrestling Podcast, go to frolifeplanning.com/Fro Podcast, where you'll see up to the date topics, news stories. All of our interview series is listed there for you on that, which is the new home of the Pro Wrestling Podcast information. So let's get started right away tonight. We have all sorts of news and rumors and things going on around the world of professional wrestling. And to be honest with you, it's been kind of a stale couple weeks. Like, it feels like the WWE, their booking department just doesn't seem to be putting enough emphasis behind their product, and is really beginning to show in what we watch every week on Raw, on SmackDown, and whatever. You know, the issue I have is that we're seeing the same matches constantly. We're seeing stale storylines, and there's not enough emphasis. I saw on several posts this week, whether it was eWrestling News, WrestleZone.com, Cage Side Seats, they all talk about the same issue. We all of us content creators have the same problem right now with WWE programming, and that is it's overly scripted, and there's no organic material going on at all. And a lot of people are attributing that to the fact that we're in a season right now where there's not a lot of emphasis because there's no concrete plans for SummerSlam as of right now. And that sounds great, but you still have diehard wrestling fans who look forward every week to multiple hours of programming. We don't want horrible booking. We want to see stuff that is worth our time. If we're going to take the time out of the day to avoid things like the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, NFL free agency and things like that, we're going to come to professional wrestling. Give us something we want to see. Not that there isn't some stuff to talk about in the WWE world, but not enough. Let's get started with Raw, a little bit of Raw news. The show kicked off with an in-ring segment with Miz TV. It was actually an entertaining segment for me because he had Sheamus and Cesaro out as his guests, and you could see it a mile away coming that this was going to lead to a 6-man tag team match between the Hardys and Dean Ambrose challenging Miz, Cesaro, and Sheamus. You could see it coming, but I thought the dialogue worked out very well. And I actually really liked the way that Sheamus spoke to the crowd, talking about how they were riding such a high with the fans right up until WrestleMania when the Hardys stole their moment. And it really, if you think about it, I know they're supposed to be the bad guys, but they were actually being quite honest there. They were the best tag team on the babyface side of things at WrestleMania until the Hardys came back. And instantly, all anybody gave a care about was the Hardys. So forget the fact that there's heels and baby faces and everything else. He actually was speaking some gospel truth there, and I actually kind of enjoyed that part of the segment. Of course, it leads to a little bit of a brawl, and it sets up a match for later in the evening between the gentlemen in a 6-man tag team match. But that's almost secondary. I thought the in-ring segment, and you people who listen to this podcast often know, I really am not a fan of a lot of in-ring segments, but this was actually pretty solid. Right after the commercial break, we have a swanton for the win from Jeff Hardy. It's a solid match, back and forth. Miz kind of playing the role of the scaredy cat, ducking out of the ring every time he gets a chance kind of guy. I don't like that necessarily heading into Extreme Rules, and it's conventional pay-per-view, maybe, but Extreme Rules is where you want to see the grit, the toughness, and we're just not really seeing a lot of that from the Miz. Not that he can't pull that off, I actually believe he can, but we're not seeing as much of that. You move on, there's an interesting moment where Corey Graves on commentary gets a message on his cell phone, and it has something to do with Kurt Angle. We find out later that he goes into the back, he talks to Kurt Angle, and they start this storyline where Kurt Angle is concerned that if this gets out, it could ruin him. And I don't know if this is building towards him leaving the general manager position to later become an in-ring talent, which I would love to see happen. But I have said this before. I actually am in favor of, and look, let's call it what it is. In 2018, when Daniel Bryan's contract is up with WWE, he's going to go elsewhere and wrestle again if he can. I actually believe that most of the people who are in the neurological field, all the ones he's talked to, would clear him to wrestle even now. I'm telling you, WWE is making a huge mistake if they don't find a way to encourage a match between Kurt Angle and Daniel Bryan at Survivor Series, a battle of the general managers. I've said that 2 months ago. It's still my idea. It's still something I think they should work on, and I don't know what they're building towards here, unless it's just to eliminate Angle from his position to get him into a wrestling capacity. I don't see any other benefit to whatever it is that they're building there. Elias Sampson's out. He's playing the guitar again. He goes against a local guy named Zach Evans. He absolutely just demolishes the guy, which is actually kind of cool. It's bizarre for me that Elias Sampson, he looks like a hybrid of like Seth Rollins and like, I don't know, Roman Reigns if they had a baby. It's kind of weird. But he looked great. This is the second week in a row he looks strong. I like the way they build his character. I get the impression we've just got too many guys at the top of the card that are very similar in their appearance. We've got Samoa Joe in the back. He's talking about what's going to happen at Extreme Rules, what he's going to do with Bray Wyatt. Bray Wyatt comes back and he throws out some of his commentary. I actually am getting more and more intrigued by this Bray Wyatt versus Samoa Joe banter that goes on, because I think they would actually make for an interesting program. This, of course, leads to the match that was promoted so heavily all week, Samoa Joe versus Finn Balor versus Bray Wyatt, which is surprisingly a really solid but short and abbreviated match. I really thought they should have given him a lot more time. They really held it back quite a bit. I mean, the whole total match time was maybe 10-15 minutes, not even 15, probably about 10-12 minutes, and they have so much more they could have done. But it's okay, because it leaves you with a little bit of a teaser heading into the pay-per-view where you're going to get to see the things you really truly want to see. Samoa Joe ends up picking up the win after Balor hits the coup de grace, and then he gets thrown out of the ring, and then Joe comes in and he steals the pin on Wyatt. Very cool match. I think these three guys, typically, triple threats really don't do much for me. These guys are all entertaining. They're all interesting. And again, even when, you see certain parts of the match, you see the one spot where Samoa Joe goes up and grabs Bray Wyatt by the beard to help drag him up off the apron. Like, just little things like that I think are really cool. They add another layer to the storyline of what we're looking at. Rollins is in the back. He's talking about Roman Reigns. They have met in the ring before. They have history, and it's going to be a war, is what he calls it. And in this situation, he says Seth freaking Rollins owns Roman Reigns. I'm not going to say that. I think they've had a pretty good back and forth the entire time they've ever feuded, but it is fun to get to see them in the ring together with them both being babyfaces at this point. At least that's what WWE thinks, they're both babyfaces. We have Noam Dar with Alicia Fox going against Rich Swann with Sasha Banks. I don't know what the affiliation with Sasha Banks going to Rich Swann is. They really are hyping the fact that Sasha Banks is going to make an appearance on 205 Live this week. The match itself, kind of pedestrian. Rich Swann picks up the win. I feel like Swann's being so underused. We've been absolutely bored to death for weeks with this Austin Aries and Jack Gallagher versus Neville and TJP thing going on, that Rich Swann is kind of lost in the shuffle, and I feel like he's every bit as good as any one of the four of them, and in some ways maybe even better, because he is a little more fresh. He hasn't been overexposed in that feud. I really wish they would get him back into the title picture. After the match, one of the highlights of the night for a lot of people, Rich Swann and Sasha Banks dancing in the ring. These two look like they'd make an interesting pairing, and, WWE seems to be reluctant to make Sasha Banks a heel, and there was a little teasing of that earlier in the year, and then they kind of went away from it. So it'll be interesting to see if she stays with Rich Swann for any kind of duration of time. There's an interview in the back. So thrilled to see the Revival back on Raw, and when they're being interviewed, they have a conversation about, seeing them on the footage from last week. We talked about it here. They were in the background of the camera angle when Bayley was being interviewed. They were there last week when Enzo was attacked. This leads to another segment out front where Big Cass actually confronts Corey Graves at the commentary desk for insinuating that Big Cass had something to do with Enzo getting attacked the previous week, which I felt like that was horrible. Like, I'm fine with that angle. If you want to have Big Cass turn on Enzo and he's the one attacking him, which is what the storyline in all the news outlets today was, PWIonline.com and various others are all reporting the same thing, that the plan is to break up Enzo and Cass and have Cass go heel. I'm fine with that, but don't give it away. At this point, I feel like you just told everybody what your long-term booking is for this. That's horrible. Leave the Revival as the scapegoats. Don't say anything about Cass. Cass should have come out and acted pissed off again and have nothing to do with, like, blurting out that he's insinuating that he's the reason that he was getting attacked. That's horrible booking. I don't know where these people think this stuff up. Like, one time I remember looking on WWE's corporate website, and it talked about how the credentials to get one of their creative positions, you had to be a soap opera person or a television person for X amount of time. We don't need a soap opera. We need wrestling angles that make sense. We don't want a soap opera. I get that it's choreographed. I get that it's predetermined. These are athletes. We want to see an athletic display. We don't want to see this horrible booking drama. Man, like, take us back to, like, the days of Bill Watts and people like that who really knew how to book angles. This was terrible. Kalisto's in the ring. He's going to take on Titus O'Neil. He's going to show Apollo Crews that he can get it done too. This actually goes pretty well. Titus O'Neil grabs the tights after a short exchange and gets a pinfall victory, and then he's taking his selfie in the ring. You can see Apollo Crews kind of ribbing him a little bit about the fact that he held the tights, but at the end of the day, you win some, you lose some. He didn't get caught, so all's fair, you know. There's an in-ring segment with Alexa Bliss and Bayley. It's one of those, this was like a throwback to The Rock and Mankind doing the whole, like, this is your life thing. That's exactly what this is. This was Bayley's life, but this was horrible. They had, like, her 4th grade teacher or whatever, and they had, like, an old boyfriend and an old friend of hers and all this other nonsense. And, yeah, it was almost like a carbon copy of The Rock, but it didn't come off right. Instead, in a bizarre shift of events, despite the fact that this angle was god-awful, Bayley went straight up rogue and started busting out the kendo stick. I actually kind of liked it. I thought that she made herself look like a legitimate threat. And that's something she hasn't looked like since she arrived on the Raw roster. So, very cool segment. I like it. I think it builds some good intrigue heading into their match at Extreme Rules. We go to the back and Enzo's out again. Cass is in there checking on Enzo. Kurt Angle walks up. Cass has this, he's fed up. He knows it's the Revival, and Cass isn't going to leave Enzo's side again. So I guess, you know, at some point, I guess he can't get jumped again if you never leave his side. It doesn't make any sense. I really don't like the booking on that angle. Austin Aries and Jack Gallagher, we talked about it earlier, they're taking on Neville and TJP for the 3,457th time in the last 3 months. Not literally. Hypothetically, you know, it's terrible. We've seen it. It's over. It's done. Stop. The only difference here is that Austin Aries locks in the last chancellery and gets Aries to tap out. I'm sorry. He gets Neville to tap out. If that didn't happen, this was a total waste of time. They got like 8-9 minutes. You know, so I guess they got a little bit of time to work. But God, we've seen it. We've seen it 100 times. Stop giving us the same stupid match. Like, I don't know how many fans have to turn the channel before they figure out they're screwing up. Look at what you're doing and why it's a problem. You're down to some of your lowest ratings in like 25, 30 years. Stop chasing fans away by giving us the same matches week in, week out, night in and night out. It's ridiculous. We have an interview with Neville backstage. They ask him if this changes anything now that he's tapped out right before the pay-per-view, before their submission match. He just storms off. There's a segment with Roman Reigns talking about he and Rollins, whether or not they're friends or not, and things like that. Just typical banter, kind of going along with what Seth Rollins said earlier in the night. He says he's going to show Rollins why it's his yard. I really wish they'd get off the yard thing. It's stupid. We get a different segment where Goldust is talking. He's giving us another one of his Shattered Dreams productions. He talks about, you know, it takes a long time to reach one's breaking point. Now he's back in the director's chair. R-Truth knew that Goldust was too big to be in a supporting role. Truth held him back. Their ending is going to be golden. The golden age is back. That's a quote from his interview. I actually thought it was really cool. He looks like the Goldust of old. He acts like the Goldust of old. The problem is, they'll never push him like the Goldust of old. The Goldust of old was the Intercontinental Champion. He's now an over-the-hill, you know, has-been great wrestler. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trash-talking Dustin Rhodes. I think he's one of the best wrestlers, most underappreciated wrestlers in the history of the business. But this felt artificial, felt phony. Now, the R-Truth comments afterwards, they were interesting. He was like quoting Samuel L. Jackson and, running down the Pulp Fiction references, and I actually enjoyed that. I thought he did a really nice job of sounding tough, looking legit, and showing a side of his character we haven't seen before. We wrap up the night with Roman Reigns versus Seth Rollins. Incredibly well put together match. It was not as long as a pay-per-view match, but it had all the intrigue and quality of a pay-per-view match. And I really enjoyed that. I think they did a great job selling this match. The only thing I didn't like is the fact that Roman Reigns hit a really clean spear for the win at the end of that match. Seth Rollins picks up the loss heading into the pay-per-view. It really seems to take a lot of momentum away from Seth. I think at this point Finn Balor is the favorite to face Brock Lesnar at Great Balls of Fire coming out of Extreme Rules. But I guess maybe with the loss, you have a chance that they do the right thing and give the opportunity to Seth Rollins, which is what I hope they do. That is all the time we have for this episode. Check back with us next time. We'll talk about SmackDown, what went down, everything there is going on in WWE and around the wrestling world. Special thanks as always to bensound.com and purpleplanet.com for producing all the music and sound effects. Always thank you, Beazle Games, bringing a new friend to family game night with sketchy people. Go to thegamecrafter.com/games/sketchypeople to pick up your copy today, and to alleyrepair.com. Contact Alley Repair today for servicing of all of your classic skee ball, pinball, and arcade game needs. Be sure to shoot over to our website at frolifeplanning.com for all your higher education needs. Call in to our Sound Off line. Get us your questions, get us your comments, anything you want us to cover on Saturday night's live broadcast at 267-642-1160. And make sure you pop over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/FroWrestlingPodcast if you would like to become a patron member of the Fro Wrestling team. I'm Fred Froelich, better known as Mr. Fro. I want to thank you for taking a few moments with us today, and if you're looking for more wrestling news and rumors, go to www.tsjsports.com/WWE for the latest articles on the world of professional wrestling. Until next episode, which may only be a few moments away, take care and have a great night.